For my entire adult life, the nation of Iran has been at war with the United States, whether we acknowledged it or not. I graduated high school in 1979, and just a few months later, students stormed the American embassy in Tehran, taking 53 people hostage. Iran has repeatedly been named the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism. They, or their proxies, have bombed American barracks and carried out all sorts of mischief. For decades, they've sought to obtain nuclear weapons. Their ultimate aims have been to destroy both what they call the little Satan, which is Israel, and the great Satan, the United States of America. Some presidents appease them, as did Obama. Some negotiate. They feared President Reagan so much that they released the hostages just as he was sworn into office. Now President Trump has launched a major number of strikes against their nuclear facility and also calculated strikes killing their supreme leader. Is this the right strategy, or is it too risky for our security? At a minimum, we've already paid an economic price with higher gas prices and a falling stock market. To better understand the geopolitics, I've invited our good friend Rod Martin, CEO of Martin Capital, back to the Economic War Room. You can follow him at rodmartin.org. Fox Business calls him a tech guru. Gawker once labeled him a brilliant nonconformist, while Britain's Guardians described him as a philosopher capitalist. The Epoch Times quotes him as a leading China expert, and Blaze TV has named him one of America's leading public intellectuals. I call him a friend. Rod was part of PayPal's pre-IPO startup team, serving as special counsel to founder and CEO Peter Thiel, and also served as policy director to former Governor Mike Huckabee. Welcome, Rod, to the Economic War Room.
Excellent to be here.
You know, it's so good to have you back, but right now it's kind of an interesting time, I guess, a Chinese curse. Why did President Trump choose to go after Iran right now?
Well, it's no accident that on the Islamic calendar, the beginning of the strikes was on 9/11. I don't think a lot of Western media caught that. But, you know, the bigger issue is they have very rapidly reconstituted their missile program. And we're talking about ICBMs in addition to everything else. They're quite adept at this. Iranians are very smart people and very technically proficient, highly educated, and they're a real threat to the world under the wrong regime. As you just pointed out, we've been at war with Iran for 47 years. We just don't always acknowledge it because we're the biggest boy on the block and we have the luxury of pretending things aren't actually happening. If we were Iraq or Pakistan and Iran had been at war with us for 47 years, we would certainly notice. But we're half a world away, and you know they hit us with what seem like pinpricks to the average person in Florida or Texas or Michigan, because you know they kill some of our guys in Iraq with IEDs. Half, by the way, of our fatalities in Iraq directly attributable to Iran, not to people in Iraq, but Iranian proxies there with Iranian weapons. You know, we'll have, you know, the embassy bombing in '83. We have the hostage crisis that you described. I was 10 when that started, and you know, we were just gripped every single day on the television with, you know, what's happening in Tehran. This has been going on for a very long time. These guys, the people who run this regime, are a sect of a sect. They are called Twelvers. They are part of a relatively small group of Shiite Muslims who believe not only that the Messiah will come back. I mean, Methodists and Baptists and everybody believe that their Messiah will come back. The difference is that Baptists and Methodists don't think they need to cause that to happen. And the Iranian regime believes not only do they have to cause it to happen, but that the mechanism of action is basically a rain of nuclear fire. Burn down the world and the Mahdi will return. So these are not people who can be deterred with normal, mutual assured destruction strategies, or, you know, any of the things that have been successful with the Russians or the Chinese or other powers through the years. These are people who, if they have it, they're going to use it. And if that's a suicide run, they're actually happy about it. And those people, this small group of people, dominate, I would say, occupy a country of 90 million perfectly lovely people, who, the majority of whom aren't even Muslims, who have historically been one of America's top allies and a friend to Israel going back 2,500 years.
Well, let's talk about that. Are the people sick in Iran of the Sharia enforcement that's been thrust upon them? I've got some photos of young people in Iran before the Ayatollah came to power, and they looked as Western as anybody else. And then afterwards, you see them completely covered shopping for wedding dresses or walking down the street. Are the people upset with the Iranian government?
If that were all it were, we would actually not be in this situation. But the truth is, this is an incredibly brutal regime. It operates economically as a socialist dictatorship, but it absolutely has this incredibly unique and uniquely evil theological aspect to it, so much so that they actually execute 16-year-old girls for the crime of getting raped. This is a wicked, wicked regime that the people of Iran are suffering under. And yes, the video coming out of Iran, such as we can get, because, you know, they've shut down the internet as much as they can, but we get a lot out. And the videos of Iranians cheering our airstrikes on regime installations are just breathtaking. They'll bring you to tears. The reaction of these regular Iranians to our action against their oppressors. And, you know, the truth is, Iranian government data tells us that more than half of Iranians are no longer religious at all, that there's an enormous upsurge in Zoroastrianism, the ancient religion of Persia, and also Christianity. And most important, of 75,000 mosques in Iran, over the last several years, 50,000 have closed. So yes, this is a people ready to be free.
Well, and there were all these killings. I mean, I'm looking at the statistics, over 36,500 killings. That was January 25th. How many more have died at the hands of this brutal dictatorship? Okay, Rod, we're gonna have to take a break. When we come back, I want to ask you, is it possible for there to be regime change in Iran without American boots on the ground? I mean, that's what Americans don't like. They don't like the nation building. They don't mind so much if we can turn an evil regime into a good one. We'll cover this and more when we come back with Rod Martin. We're talking with Rod Martin. We're talking about American action, plus Israel, in Iran. Rod, what exactly have we been doing, and what's the upside for us if we're successful?
Well, the upside is extraordinary, and the way the president has chosen to get there is a function not only of his general strategy, but also of the advance of American technology beyond anything the world has ever seen and anything we could have imagined 10 or 20 years ago. It's really quite remarkable what we're capable of now. And Venezuela got a lesson in that. When we went in and we seized their dictator out of one of the most heavily fortified compounds in the hemisphere and did so without a single American death. Plenty of Venezuelan dead, but actually a lot of those were Cuban. And we demonstrated to the world, you really are vulnerable. We can reach out and touch you. So what's happening in Iran is a little bit different because there really isn't a Delcy Rodriguez in the Iranian regime. Delcy is the acting president in Venezuela. She was number 2 behind Maduro, and she's one of the co-conspirators. You know, the Maduros have been indicted in New York on conspiracy charges. Delcy is one of the conspirators. Most of the Venezuelan government are co-conspirators. They all know we can go in and pick them off one by one if they don't play ball, and we'll get to a free and fair election there. That's not Iran. That's not how Iran is structured, and Iran doesn't allow opposition parties. Iran doesn't have elections that it pretends to win like Venezuela's regime has done. So you actually have to destroy the centers of power of the regime to make it possible for the disarmed populace to be able to rise successfully and overthrow their government a la 1979. That's happening now. And we're not only seeing the widespread destruction of IRGC forces and bases, of leadership compounds, of key leaders throughout the regime. Babylon B had a great headline the other day. Iran warns the United States, we have a nearly unlimited supply of supreme leaders. You know, we're doing those things. But now it's getting very granular. In the last 24 to 48 hours, we have started carrying out targeted drone strikes on secret police and militia forces at traffic stops and, you know, actually operating on the ground in the city, terrorizing the population. We're taking those guys out one by one. That is absolutely unprecedented in the history of warfare, and it shows you what we're capable of. So can we get to a point where there's actually regime change without boots on the ground? I would suggest there are probably spec ops all over Iran for various purposes right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if we occupy Karg Island. But aside from things like that, no, we're not going to invade. There aren't going to be 250,000 American troops in Iran for 20 years. And if we can just degrade the regime sufficiently, the people will rise. I believe they will rise in response to the call from Reza Pahlavi, the Crown Prince. He has shown an ability to get them to do so in recent weeks. And I think we can have a free and prosperous Iran.
What does that do in the Middle East? I mean, it seems like I've got a funny X post that says the Muslim world is divided about Iran. Muslim countries in favor of removing the regime: Jordan, Kuwait, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, Bahrain. But the Muslim countries against the removal of the regime, and it's a joke, but Great Britain, France, and Spain. It seems like the Middle East is in favor of this. Is that the case?
Absolutely. Iran is the source of every ongoing armed conflict in region. There's not an exception. I mean, if you want to redefine the region to include, something like Darfur, okay, but if you're talking about Gaza, if you're talking about Lebanon, if you're talking about Yemen and the Red Sea, if you're talking about anything, anywhere that threatens these countries, it is armed, directed, and funded from Tehran. You take out this regime and all of that goes away. I'm not going to say that there will be no Hezbollah guerrillas. I'm not saying Hamas will just disappear. I'm saying that they can't get very far without money and guns, and there's no one to replace the Iranian regime for that. So yes, peace breaks out. The Board of Peace gets to do its work. There's actually the potential for a widespread adoption of the Abraham Accords. And if the Saudis don't want to play ball with that, and I think they do, I think the older generation is holding MBS and some of the younger guys back a little bit because of their long-time devotion to the Palestinian cause that the younger generation simply does not share. But in the final analysis, if Saudi Arabia doesn't want to play ball with Israel, Iran's going to. I said earlier, Iran has long been a friend of the Jews, thousands of years. They have been in modern times as well under the Shah. And the people in Iran are cheering Bibi. I mean, they're constant. They speak of Trump as uncle, and they're chanting uncle, uncle, and Bibi. And it's just an extraordinary thing. They're also chanting the name of Reza Pahlavi. And this must not be missed. He does seem to be emerging as the single unifying figure. And I think what you get is something very much like Juan Carlos I in Spain, who was set up as the king again after dictator Francisco Franco died. Over a couple-year period, he led Spain in a transitional regime that led to a constitutional monarchy, not that different from England's. And I think that's exactly what you'll see in Iran. It's certainly what Reza Pahlavi has been promising for the last 40 years.
Now, there's also an upside globally beyond just the Middle East. I know that Iran has been a primary supplier of oil to China, as has Venezuela. It looks like Trump is taking a really dramatic move against two other adversaries of the United States, China being one and potentially Russia. What are your thoughts?
In Trump world, all roads lead to China. And after the break, I can break some of this down and how all the pieces fit together. But at the end of the day, Trump understands that China is the primary geopolitical threat to the United States. It has to be contained. And if it does, it will collapse under its own weight.
All right, so there are a lot of potential upsides here. After the break, I not only want to dive into China, but I also want to dive into some of the risks. Oil prices, stock market, Straits of Hormuz, attacks in the United States from drones, sleeper cells here in America. I want to get your perspective on not just the opportunities, but the risks that we're facing from our actions in Iran. We'll be right back. Rob, before we went to break, you were alluding to the idea that Donald Trump has some kind of master plan and that the actions in Iran weren't just a response solely to the nuclear threat, which was real, and the ICBMs and others that they were developing, but there seems to be a bunch of puzzle pieces falling into place that shows us Trump's vision for the region and the world.
In the decades since Ronald Reagan, who was brilliant and who Trump clearly learned deeply from, the American response to foreign crises has been very piecemeal. You know, everything is in its own silo. And oh, by the way, we're going to telegraph all our plans to the enemy long in advance and tell them exactly what we will and won't do. Trump rejects all of that in very much the same way that Reagan did. Reagan didn't even give the Queen a heads up, much less the Soviets, when he seized Grenada. You know, Reagan was ready and willing to be unpredictable in a way that completely flummoxed the Soviet Union and ultimately led to their collapse. And he also understood, and Peter Schweitzer did a wonderful job of lining this out in a book called Victory, how Reagan allied with the Saudis for the purpose of collapsing the price of oil just a few years after the 79 oil shock under Carter, for the purpose of depriving the Russians of hard currency they needed to be able to conduct the arms race he had initiated. Well, okay, fast forward. Donald Trump clearly learned all of the lessons and then some. So you take Venezuela offline, you take Iran offline, you disrupt the shadow fleet in a way that takes Russia partly offline. All of that goes straight to the current massive geopolitical threat, China, because China actually imports between 40 and 50% of its oil from those three sources. It's all illegal oil. It's all under sanction, and every nation in the world is legitimately entitled to seize those tankers, and they've started doing so. It's not just the coolness of the U.S. Navy seizing tankers off Venezuela or chasing a tanker all the way to the Indian Ocean. That was cool. But now you have Sweden interdicting tankers, Belgium seizing tankers, and the earthquake is India, which Trump appears to have flipped from the Russian column for the first time in 80 years. They are now seizing Russian tankers as well. Okay, that forces China onto the open market for oil. That is an earthquake, and it is a huge subsidy to the Chinese economy that just evaporates. At the same time, you actually make it possible for Venezuela and ultimately Iran to produce in full force quantities, such that global oil prices a year and a half from now ought to be a lot lower because there's just going to be a lot more supply. Now, the short-term situation is rough with them hitting ships in the Straits of Hormuz, but we'll sort that out pretty quickly. And this release of 400 million barrels by IEA is a big deal, and it will help bridge the gap. But the bigger strategy here is reorder the world. There won't be a Cuban regime hosting Russian and Chinese intel bases. There won't be a Venezuela supplying China and potentially hosting a naval base for the Chinese in the Caribbean. And ultimately, Trump wants to flip Iran and Russia. Russia will never be our friend, but they don't have to be our enemy. And if we are profitable for them, that turns them on China in a significant way. And China's pretty much left alone. Finally, you do have Iran, 90 million highly educated, pro-Western people who can actually establish a democracy. That country will be a first world country in 15 to 20 years if this succeeds. And it will be an enrichment and a glory to the world. It will absolutely bring peace in much of the Middle East.
All right, so we see a brilliant long term. We see a somewhat scary immediate term. The middle, though, we have midterm elections coming up. How is all of this going to impact the midterm elections, and what do we need to be aware of?
Well, the myth that there's a big split within MAGA has been disproved at this point by multiple pollsters on different sides of the aisle. So Fox found that 98% of self-identified MAGA supports the president on Iran. NBC and CNN just came out with polls that have it near 90%. Okay, there's just no split. Tucker Carlson and the Groypers online are talking to each other. Now, the country as a whole, if you're watching CNN, you think we're losing this war. You think the Iranians may march on New York tomorrow. And so, you know, those folks are getting a very different movie than the one the rest of the world is watching. But even so, we've seen support for the war move from 50% at the outset to now 52%. And there is nothing as persuasive as victory. I think we will see that long before the midterms. And we're also going to see the economic boom that is gathering in the United States, I think, by midsummer.
All right, Rod, you're brilliant. You've covered so many topics. I love getting the emails I get from you. People are going to want to follow you. What's the best way for them to do that?
Well, everyone should come to rodmartin.org. That's rodmartin.org. We have tens of thousands of subscribers for our daily geopolitical analysis. Fox Business calls absolutely phenomenal. No kidding. They said it. And we have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media. There's a reason. So come to rodmartin.org. That's the hub for everything. And you can follow us everywhere from there.
All right. Well, your Twitter's amazing. You've covered so many things. I want to also put in a plug for usfuture.org, which you founded. And I think you're the chairman of that, which is a think tank that is looking forward. It's the special forces in the war of ideas. It's fighting these battles here at home, domestically, politically, on like ban Sharia and things like that. But it's also giving a bird's eye view into all of the conflicts around the world. So usfuture.org, and follow you again at rodmartin.org. Rod, you've been a friend for a long time. I've known you for over 20 years, maybe 26 years almost. And everything you've told me, I've watched happen and unfold. It's almost like you have a crystal ball or something. I love you as a brother, appreciate all the excellent work that you're doing. So thank you, Rod, for being part of the Economic War Room today.
Thank you.
All right, we will summarize all of this in our free economic battle plan. You get a copy of that at economicwarroom.com. There you'll find links to rodmartin.org, usfuture.org, and all of the great work that he's doing. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. That's true in Iran and around the world. This is, thank you so much for being with us, Rod Martin. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.